Hello and welcome. I'm really glad you're here today, wherever you're listening from. I hope you can allow yourself to slow down for a moment. This is not a space for rushing or multitasking. It is a space for listening, reflecting, and gently turning inward. Today, we are exploring Ramadan not only as a religious month, but as a quiet and powerful process of inner discipline. When people speak about Ramadan, the first thing that usually comes to mind is fasting, not eating, not drinking, adjusting daily routines. These are the visible parts. But Ramadan works far more deeply than what can be seen from the outside. Beneath the physical restraint, something subtle begins to take shape within the inner self. Inner discipline is often imagined as strict control or force. It is associated with pressure, denial, or struggle. But the discipline cultivated during Ramadan is different. It is softer, quieter, and more patient. It does not demand immediate results. It develops slowly through repetition, awareness, and choice. From the very first day, fasting introduces a simple but transformative experience. Feeling an urge and not acting on it. Hunger arrives, yet eating is delayed. Thirst appears, yet water must wait. These sensations are real and sometimes intense, but they do not dictate behavior. This experience teaches the mind something fundamental, that not every feeling requires immediate action. This lesson may seem small, but it reaches far beyond food. Once the body learns that hunger can be tolerated, the mind begins to question other habits. If hunger can be endured, perhaps impatience can also be softened. If thirst can be delayed, maybe anger can be paused. Ramadan opens this space of questioning gently, without force. In the early days, the body often resists. Energy drops. Concentration feels harder. The mind may complain. This resistance is part of the training. Discipline does not emerge in comfort. It forms in challenge. As days pass, the body adapts. Hunger becomes familiar. The shock fades, and with that adaptation comes confidence. This confidence is quiet. It does not announce itself. It is simply the knowledge that difficulty can be faced and survived. The inner self begins to trust its own strength. This trust is one of the most important outcomes of discipline. Another essential element of Ramadan's inner training is awareness. Fasting heightens sensitivity. Small details become noticeable. Emotions rise more quickly. Reactions feel closer to the surface. Rather than removing emotions, Ramadan reveals them. This revelation is not meant to judge or criticize. It is meant to illuminate. When irritation appears more easily, it becomes easier to notice it. When impatience rises, it can be observed rather than immediately expressed. Discipline begins with awareness, and Ramadan provides a clear mirror. In daily life, many reactions happen automatically. Words are spoken without reflection. Judgments form without pause. Ramadan interrupts this automatic pattern. The reduced energy encourages stillness. In that stillness, self-observation becomes possible. One of the most powerful disciplines practiced during Ramadan is restraint in speech. When the body is fasting, words feel heavier. Speaking unnecessarily feels draining. This naturally leads to more careful communication. Silence becomes valuable. This silence is not emptiness, it is presence. Choosing not to speak can be an act of strength. It creates space to listen, to reflect, and to respond rather than react. Over time, this restraint reshapes how communication feels, making it more intentional and less impulsive. The discipline of Ramadan also reshapes the relationship with time, expedition. Without constant eating and drinking, the day takes on a different rhythm. Time feels slower, yet fuller. Waiting becomes part of the experience. Waiting for sunset, waiting for rest, waiting for renewal. This waiting teaches patience in a very practical way. Some things cannot be rushed. The sun will set when it sets. This acceptance softens the need to control everything. Discipline here is not about action, but about surrender. Surrender does not weaken the inner self. It strengthens it. When one accepts limits, tension decreases. The mind learns to rest within boundaries rather than resist them. Another quiet shift occurs in how comfort is perceived. Comfort becomes less constant during Ramadan. This absence sharpens appreciation. Simple things feel meaningful. A sip of water feels profound. A small meal feels sufficient. Discipline here teaches gratitude. By reducing excess, it reveals abundance. This lesson often lingers long after the fast ends. Desire also changes during Ramadan. Desire does not disappear, but it loses urgency. Hunger is felt, but it no longer demands immediate satisfaction. This distance between desire and action is the core of inner discipline. When desire is observed rather than obeyed, freedom grows. The inner self learns that it is not controlled by impulses. This realization is deeply empowering. As fasting continues, many people notice that restraint becomes easier. What once required effort now feels natural. This is how discipline moves from conscious struggle into habit. It becomes part of the inner rhythm. However, Ramadan does not promise perfection. Some days feel harder than others. Energy fluctuates. Emotions rise and fall. Discipline is not measured by flawlessness, but by returning to intention again and again. Each day offers a fresh beginning. Even after a difficult day, the next morning brings another opportunity to choose awareness. This repetition builds resilience. It teaches that failure is not the end of discipline, but part of its formation. Inner discipline during Ramadan is not about becoming rigid. It is about becoming responsive rather than reactive. It is about learning to pause, to choose, and to act with intention. As this inner process deepens, its influence quietly expands. The discipline cultivated in hunger and silence begins to shape thoughts, emotions, and interactions. What starts internally does not remain contained. It naturally moves outward, affecting how one relates to the world. The training continues, unfolding in layers, each one revealing a deeper understanding of self-control, patience, and conscious living. The outer world does not immediately notice these changes. From the outside, life may look the same. Daily responsibilities continue. Conversations happen. Work gets done. Yet inside, something subtle is reorganizing itself. As discipline settles into the inner self, reactions slow down. There's a small but meaningful pause between feeling and responding. This pause is where choice lives. Ramadan gently widens this space. In moments that once triggered immediate responses, there is now a breath, a second of awareness, a quiet decision. This shift is especially noticeable in moments of frustration. When the body is tired and hungry, irritation can surface easily. Yet, Ramadan places a boundary around expression. One becomes more careful with tone, with words, with facial expressions, not because emotions disappear, but because expressing them impulsively feels heavier. This heaviness is instructive. It teaches that every reaction has a cost. Words carry weight. Anger consumes energy. Discipline here is not suppression, it is conservation. Energy is treated as something valuable, not to be wasted on unnecessary conflict. With time, emotional regulation improves. Feelings are acknowledged internally without needing immediate release. This creates emotional maturity. The inner self becomes less dependent on external validation or immediate relief. Another quiet lesson emerges around intention. Fasting is not accidental. It begins each day with a conscious choice. This daily renewal strengthens intentional living. Even routine actions gain meaning when they are connected to purpose. Waking early, adjusting schedules, planning meals, all of these require forethought. Discipline grows through preparation. The mind learns to anticipate needs rather than react to crises. This skill transfers naturally into other areas of life. During Ramadan, the relationship with pleasure also changes. Pleasure becomes delayed. Anticipation replaces instant gratification. This delay heightens awareness and appreciation. Pleasure is no longer automatic. It is earned through patience. This shift challenges modern habits built around immediacy. Everything today is designed to be quick. Ramadan quietly resists this pattern. It teaches that waiting does not diminish satisfaction. It deepens it. The inner self begins to recognize that not everything needs to be consumed the moment it appears. Desires can be acknowledged without being fulfilled right away. This realization strengthens self-respect. Another aspect of discipline forms through consistency. Fasting repeats daily. This repetition builds rhythm. Discipline becomes less about motivation and more about commitment. Even on days when motivation is low, the practice continues. This teaches a crucial lesson. Discipline does not depend on feeling ready. It depends on showing up. This lesson reshapes how challenges are approached beyond Ramadan. Fatigue also plays a role. When energy is limited, priorities become clearer. Unnecessary tasks feel burdensome. The mind naturally simplifies. This simplification reveals what truly matters. In this state, distractions lose their appeal. Excessive noise feels intrusive. Silence feels nourishing. Discipline refines attention. Focus becomes selective. This selectivity helps reduce mental clutter. Thoughts slow down. Inner dialogue becomes less chaotic. With fewer impulses competing for attention, clarity emerges. Discipline during Ramadan also cultivates humility. Physical weakness reminds the inner self of its limits. This awareness softens ego. There is less need to prove, to argue, or to dominate. Humility here is not self-diminishment. It is realism. Recognizing limits fosters compassion, both toward oneself and others. When everyone is navigating their own struggles, judgment loses its grip. Compassion deepens discipline. When the inner self becomes gentler, self-control feels less like restriction and more like care. Choices are guided by respect rather than force. This compassion extends inward as well. Mistakes are met with understanding instead of harsh criticism. Discipline becomes sustainable because it is kind. As the days progress, discipline stops feeling like effort and begins to feel like alignment. Actions, thoughts, and intentions start to move in the same direction. This alignment creates inner calm. Calm does not mean absence of challenge. It means steadiness within challenge. Ramadan trains this steadiness gradually through small daily acts of restraint. The inner self learns to sit with discomfort without panic. Hunger comes and goes. Tiredness rises and fades. Emotions appear and dissolve. Nothing stays forever. This understanding brings emotional balance. Difficult moments are no longer seen as threats. They are temporary states. Discipline thrives in this perspective. What makes Ramadan's discipline unique is that it is temporary, yet transformative. Knowing that the fast will end teaches balance. Discipline is practiced intensely, but not endlessly. This prevents rigidity. The inner self learns when to hold and when to release. This flexibility is a sign of true discipline. As the month continues, the question quietly shifts from, "Can I endure this?" to "How can I carry this awareness forward?" The inner changes seek expression beyond fasting. The discipline cultivated in silence, hunger, and patience begins to shape daily decisions in subtle ways. Choices become more conscious. Reactions become softer. Presence deepens. And even without noticing, the inner self starts to live differently, not through dramatic change, but through steady, intentional restraint that continues to unfold. This unfolding does not announce itself loudly. There is no sudden realization, no single moment where everything becomes clear. Instead, it settles quietly, like light at dawn, spreading without demand. As awareness deepens, time itself feels different. Moments stretch. Silence gains texture. Waiting no longer feels empty. It feels inhabited. Ramadan gently rewires the perception of time, pulling attention away from urgency and toward presence. Presence becomes the new measure of fulfillment. Being fully aware of a moment, even an ordinary one, feels complete. Drinking water at sunset is no longer just relief from thirst. It is gratitude made tangible. Each sip carries patience, effort, and intention. This attentiveness reshapes gratitude. Gratitude is no longer abstract or automatic. It is felt physically. Hunger sharpens appreciation. Fatigue heightens thankfulness for rest. Small comforts regain significance. Through this process, excess becomes visible. Things once consumed mindlessly now appear unnecessary. The inner self begins to question habits that drain energy rather than restore it. Discipline here becomes discernment. Discernment leads to simplicity. The desire to do less but with meaning grows stronger. Noise is reduced. Commitments are examined. Not everything needs attention. This simplification creates space. In that space, reflection naturally arises. Thoughts once buried under busyness surface gently. Some are comforting, others uncomfortable. Ramadan does not filter them. It allows them. Facing these thoughts requires courage. Without constant distraction, the inner self meets itself honestly. Patterns become visible. Repeated reactions, long-held fears, unspoken hopes, all appear without judgment. This encounter is not meant to overwhelm. It is meant to clarify. Discipline provides the container that makes reflection safe. Structure holds the experience together. As clarity increases, intention sharpens. Why certain actions are taken becomes more important than how they appear. Motivation shifts inward. Approval loses urgency. This inward orientation strengthens authenticity. Actions align more closely with values. Words are chosen with care. Silence becomes an option rather than a gap to be filled. The relationship with silence transforms. Silence is no longer awkward. It becomes restorative. It allows the nervous system to settle. Thoughts slow. Breath deepens. In this quiet, the inner self reconnects with meaning. Meaning not as a concept, but as a felt sense of direction. Life begins to feel guided rather than reactive. Another subtle change emerges in how challenges are perceived. Difficulties no longer feel personal. Hunger, tiredness, emotional discomfort, they are experiences, not identities. This distinction creates resilience. Resilience grows through repetition. Each day of fasting reinforces the understanding that discomfort can be managed with grace. The inner self learns that it is stronger than assumed. This strength is gentle, not forceful. It does not seek dominations. It seeks balance. Discipline here is flexible, responsive, humane. Relationships are also affected. Patience extends outward. Listening improves. The need to interrupt or defend diminishes. Presence becomes a gift offered to others. Empathy deepens naturally. Recognizing one's own vulnerability opens space for understanding others. Judgment softens. Compassion expands without effort. This compassion does not erase boundaries. Discipline teaches where limits are necessary. Saying no becomes easier when it protects inner balance. Boundaries rooted in awareness feel respectful, not harsh. They honor energy. They preserve clarity. As days continue, the inner self notices a quiet confidence forming. Not pride, but trust. Trust in one's ability to choose intentionally. Trust in the capacity to endure, reflect, and grow. This trust changes how the future is approached. Uncertainty feels less threatening. The inner self has learned to move through limitation with steadiness. When moments of weakness appear, They are met with understanding rather than disappointment. Discipline allows space for imperfection. Consistency matters more than flawlessness. Gradually, the fast becomes more than abstaining from food and drink. It becomes a posture toward life, a way of meeting moments with restraint, care, and awareness. Even as the body adapts, the inner lessons continue deepening. The question is no longer about how long one can fast, but about how deeply one can remain present. Ramadan, in this sense, is not something to complete. It is something to experience fully, moment by moment, breath by breath. And as this awareness settles further, the inner self begins to recognize that what has been practiced in these quiet days, patience, discipline, compassion, presence, is not limited to a month. It is a way of being that can continue gently beyond the fast. Carrying this way of being forward does not require force. It happens naturally, almost without effort, because the inner self has already tasted a different rhythm. Once experienced, it is difficult to forget. After the intensity of fasting, ordinary days begin to feel fuller. Eating returns, but awareness remains. Choices around food are more thoughtful. Quantity matters less than quality. Eating becomes an act of care rather than habit. This shift mirrors a deeper transformation. Consumption in general becomes more conscious. Time, attention, and energy are treated as limited resources. They are no longer given away casually. The inner self starts to notice where energy leaks occur. Conversations that drain, commitments that overwhelm, patterns that repeat without purpose. Discipline brings the courage to reassess. Reassessment leads to refinement. Not everything needs to be removed, but much can be adjusted. Small changes create lasting impact. Earlier rest, fewer distractions, clearer intentions. This clarity strengthens emotional balance. Mood fluctuations feel less extreme. There is a steadiness that was not present before. Emotions still arise, but they do not dominate. One reason for this stability is the strengthened relationship with discomfort. Ramadan has taught that discomfort is temporary and survivable. This lesson carries forward into daily life. When stress appears, the inner self remembers how hunger was endured calmly. When impatience rises, the memory of restraint returns. These memories act as anchors. Anchors ground the inner self in moments of challenge. They prevent spiraling. They offer perspective. What once felt overwhelming feels manageable. Another quiet change emerges in how success is defined. Productivity loses its dominance. Presence, integrity, and alignment become more meaningful measures. Doing less, but doing it well, feels satisfying. Rushing feels unnecessary. The pace slows, but the depth increases. This depth is reflected in listening. Conversations become richer when attention is fully given. Responses are thoughtful rather than reactive. Silence is allowed to exist. Through this, relationships deepen. Trust grows. Being truly present with someone becomes an act of respect. The inner self also learns to be present with itself. Loneliness feels different. Solitude no longer feels empty. It feels spacious. In this space, creativity often appears. Ideas surface naturally. Reflection turns into insight. Insight turns into gentle action. These actions are not dramatic. They are quiet adjustments that align life more closely with values. Saying no when needed. Resting without guilt. Choosing calm over chaos. Discipline supports these choices without rigidity. It adapts. It listens. It responds. What Ramadan ultimately offers is not perfection, but awareness. Awareness of limits. Awareness of strengths. Awareness of what truly nourishes. This awareness reshapes priorities. External pressures lose power. Inner guidance becomes clearer. Over time, the inner self realizes that discipline is not about restriction. It is about freedom. Freedom from impulse. freedom from excess, freedom from constant reaction. Freedom creates space for meaning. Meaning creates fulfillment. Fulfillment brings peace. This peace is not loud. It does not announce itself. It is felt in small moments, a calm breath, a patient pause, a kind word chosen intentionally. As life continues, these moments accumulate. They form a quiet foundation that supports everything else. Ramadan may end, but what it reveals remains available. The inner self now knows how to return to stillness, how to pause, how to choose. And in this knowing, there is a gentle confidence, the confidence that presence, once learnt, can always be practiced again. At this point, the inner transformation has quietly settled into its place. There is no need to search for dramatic differences. Change is rarely loud. It lives in the subtle shift of how a person relates to themselves. What Ramadan teaches is not to do more, but to live with greater awareness, more slowly, more attentively, more intentionally. The awareness shaped through hunger, thirst, and waiting begins to flow into the rest of life. The inner voice becomes clearer now. It knows when to pause and when to move forward. It does not demand or insist. It simply reminds. It reminds that patience is not a burden, but a strength. It reminds that discipline is not a restriction, but a form of freedom. It reminds that meaning is often found in quiet moments. Perhaps most importantly, it reveals the value of being alone with oneself. Growth does not happen in noise, but in the spaces where we are willing to stop. This journey does not end here. It only changes its form. Ramadan passes, but what it leaves behind remains. In breath, in awareness, in response. And when one becomes aware of that trace, they understand something essential. True transformation is the kind that happens without announcement. If this reflection resonated with you, you can support the podcast by liking this episode, subscribing for more quiet conversations, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your presence and reflections help this space grow. This is where we pause, quietly, but with meaning,